Welcome to Talking Point on Global Business. We'll be talking with Tijah Bolton Akpan, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Policy Alert, a non-governmental organization. And we'll be looking at the issue of the cleanup in the Niger Delta, using Ogoni, of course, which had a UNEP report in 2017. Recommend that there should be a cleanup as at that time. And 2017, or 2011 actually, not 2017, 2011 actually, 2011 till now, what has happened? And so that's what we'll be talking to Bolton. Thank you very much, Bolton, for talking to us. Now, let's go straight into the issue of the cleanup. In 2011, of course, like I said earlier on, this UNEP report recommended a cleanup, and the Nigerian government said it had started. So what's the update on that?
Right. So thank you very much. Since 2011, when the UNEP reports came out, that's like 10 years now. So the UNEP report recommended that there should be a holistic cleanup of Ogoni land, which was supposed to be more like a pilot for the cleanup of the rest of the Niger Delta. In 2017, the government of Nigeria launched the HYPREP, the Hydrocarbon Pollution Remediation Agency, under the Ministry of Environment, to oversee this cleanup effort. The cleanup was, initial cleanup was meant to cost $1 billion and to last for 30 years. Now, the action on the ground actually belies some of the recommendations of the UNEP report. So, for instance, there were certain emergency measures which should have been done by the Cleanup Remediation Agency, that's HYPREP, to set the templates for the overall cleanup effort. For instance, there was to be interventions in clean water for the communities. Because of pollution over the years, their water systems had become severely polluted. We had situations where benzene and hydrocarbon pollution had gone so many hundreds of times, in fact thousands of times higher than tolerable levels. So this was what the survey of the region actually found out. And one of the first things that needed to be done was to provide alternatives. So alternative water supply, so that people can have clean drinking water. Alternatives for, healthcare, for instance, healthcare monitoring system. There was supposed to be a health registry in place so that there could be some documentation, for instance, of how much health effects individuals and families in the community have suffered, from this pollution. Then there were certain livelihood, alternatives that needed to be put in place. So, for instance, about the bushfire, phenomenon, and we have young people who have been in the creeks, doing artisanal refining and all that, and these, also have some kind of impact on the environment, even though that's not the main cause of the pollution that we are seeing, in the region. But we'll come back to that. Now, the artisanal refining, the young people who are involved in that needed also to be given certain alternative livelihoods. So, a certain amount of money was also earmarked for that particular intervention. And so many others which were supposed to be, emergency measures that precede the actual cleanup of Ogoni land. But what we have seen is that all these things, apart from the recent, water intervention by the federal government, before now, so many years had passed and the communities have been, languishing, in the same level of despair, if not worse, because when people have expectations and those expectations are not met, it becomes, a double tragedy. So I would say that the cleanup efforts in Ogoni land has been far, far, far below par. It's below expectations. And especially worrisome is the fact that not only is the cleanup not being done to specifications, but also there is a very disturbing lack of transparency and accountability in how the effort is being prosecuted. That is a different dimension altogether, and it's another level of the entire Ogoni cleanup problematic that we need to talk about.
Now, let's look at that. I'm sorry, the artisanal minings. I want to talk about the artisanal minings. I know it may not be, yes, it is related to the cleanup itself, but maybe not directly to the UNEP report. But many people say that these artisanal miners may not leave this trade because of the kind of money they make, and they also do a lot of pollution to the environment.
Well, there are, these things actually need to be studied. One of the recommendations of the UNEP report was that there needed to be a center of excellence, in Ogoniland, that actually, raise the capacity of people within Ogoni on how to actually prosecute the cleanup effort. So a bioremediation, cleanup center of excellence was supposed to be set up within the community. Now, that serves two purposes. It would contribute to improving the quality of cleanup effort being done on the one hand. Then it also builds the capacity of community people, so that they already have these skills. And when the rest of the Niger Delta cleanup, for instance, wants to be undertaken, these people can begin to, export their skills elsewhere. So it doesn't become like Ogoniland is just an island unto itself. The challenge we are having is that the artisanal refining that is happening there is being used as an excuse by the oil and gas multinationals. So Shell, for instance, and other multinationals are pointing a finger at the young people who are doing the profile as if that is the be-all and end-all of the pollution and the problem in the Niger Delta. What is happening there is just a tip of the iceberg. The real negative environmental footprint is being caused by the oil and gas multinationals themselves. People from the oil complex, people from the government, from security agencies, from international cartels are actually involved in the stealing of Nigeria's oil. And that stealing goes along with a whole lot of, oil spills happening and so on. So there is a whole lot of environmental, consequences of, oil theft happening in the region. And that happens at a really industrial scale. It's not just those, micro artisanal activities happening there. So bringing it back to what's happening in Ogoniland, it was part of the recommendations that the artisanal activities of those young people should be addressed as one of those early measures before the cleanup happens. But we have not actually seen this happening. So it would appear that it's a setup so that people now say there is cleanup, but there is also a repollution of the environment because of these activities. But in the first place, that needed to have been dealt with so that we don't have that kind of repollution happening. So that is the scenario playing out there. And it becomes even more disturbing when you realize that the effort within Ogoniland was meant to be a precursor or a pilot, if you like, for the cleanup of the entire Niger Delta. Remember, we are saying Ogoniland would take 30 years. And we've been having all the false starts, the hit and run and so on for the past, call it 10 years. Nothing has really happened. If nothing has happened for 10 years, and we have a 30-year timeline to clean up Ogoniland, question is, when is the cleanup effort going to get to the rest of the Niger Delta?
I mean, with so much, one may wonder, why are the Ogonis, who are the original beneficiaries of this cleanup, why are these people not speaking enough?
Oh, no, they are.
Well, maybe we are not hearing them enough.
I think what the challenge is that a lot of that agitation has not been, backed by data. So one of the challenges that this effort has encountered is the disturbing lack of transparency and accountability in the management of resources that have gone into the cleanup effort. So we find situation where the oil companies are also compromising, the structure of the cleanup structure, the structure of the cleanup agency, impregnating the agency with their own elements and so on, so as to do the bidding of the companies. That's one. We also find situation where the resources that are being pushed into the cleanup efforts are not, the agency is not being very transparent on how those resources are managed. We find situation where companies that have no business in, pollution remediation are getting contracts, for cleanup activities and so on. So a lot of these things have been going on, within the cleanup effort. And this is really disturbing. So one of the things the community people need to do at this point is to do, they need to do a lot of close marking, a lot of tracking, not just for the quality of cleanup happening, or even for the emergency measures, but also on how spending for these activities are going on.
Do you think the global economic crunch has affected the whole cleanup exercise?
I think so in two ways. I think that the global economic crunch has affected the potential. It has actually given a whole lot of fillip, to the need for a comprehensive cleanup of the entire Niger Delta. Now, the economic crunch has reminded, everyone that the world is no longer the way it used to be. So, for instance, look at oil, the commodity we are also talking about, oil and gas. You see how the price dipped last year, especially within the context of COVID-19. You saw how that affected our economy, and in fact, economies of different countries across the globe. Now, within that, there is also the whole question about energy transition. So, countries across Europe and other parts of the world are quickly moving away from fossil fuels and are embracing cleaner, low carbon energy systems. Now, the question is, these companies are still very visible in the Nigerian economy. We are saying that we have, 38 billion barrels in reserves. How much of that reserve is actually commercially, do we have a prospect for commercial production? That is to say, how much of that reserve will not be abandoned given the energy transition? These companies are actually moving away. Their shareholders they are actually taking debts, buying debts to pay dividends to their shareholders because there is little or no confidence in the fossil fuel industry. A lot of the companies are actually moving their investments into clean energy, into solar and other renewable energy forms. But they are not coming up front to tell Nigerians that, look, the reserves that you have, that we have a stake in, those reserves could become stranded. So what that says about our communities is that we may be having a lot of stranded communities that have been sold on the promise of oil and gas, but with these companies pulling out, all they will have left is a messed up environment and nobody to clean it up. That's a huge and scary prospect that is coming alongside the energy transition. The flip side of that is the Nigerian government is not actually preparing to embrace the clean energy future. So we have something called the Nationally Determined Contributions, which Nigeria signed on to as part of its being a party to the Paris Agreement, on climate change.
Do you think that the government should sanction IOCs who are stakeholders in this cleanup exercise, probably from even doing business in this country, to push them to ensure that they do the cleanup themselves?
I think the Nigerian government needs to begin by sanctioning herself. Nigeria is the bigger joint venture partner. Nigerian government, the NNPC through the NPDC, has a bigger stake than the IOCs that they enter into partnership with. So just like the recent court case a few days ago, where the NNPC and Mobile have been asked to pay 82 billion to a community in Akwa Ibom State, for the same reasons. So we see that case is actually a very positive development that also speaks to the nature of the relationship between the Nigerian state and those companies it does business with in the extractive industry. So by virtue of that relationship, the Nigerian government actually has a big share in the negative, so-called externalities that happen in the sector, those ecological footprints that the sector has left within the communities. So the Nigerian government needs to first, deal with its own responsibility.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Tijah Bolton Akpan, Executive Director and co-founder of Policy Alerts. And so we'll be looking at the Niger Delta cleanup. It's an ongoing conversation. It's not something we can talk about in just the few minutes that we have spoken, but we'll continue to speak about it and follow up basically on the cleanup exercise. That's talking point. The program continues.